In this video I'm going to talk about intervals. Intervals are really the building blocks that make up chords and scales. What an interval is it's the relationship between two different notes. So if I select two notes here on the fretboard, they have a relationship. When you look at the perspective of one note from the other note, it has a named relationship. So if I pick this A here and I pick this E, they have a relationship that I can name. So when we play a scale on the guitar, we don't play every single note unless we're playing the chromatic scale. That would be considered a chromatic run, playing every note. If we select different intervals out of that chromatic scale, we can make different scales. Now intervals can be applied to chords too. So for example, if I play an A major chord, it's composed of three different notes basically. If I play a minor chord, I'm choosing a different ingredient, a different mixture of ingredients to make up that chord. So a different set of intervals make up that chord. I'm going to show a chart that talks about the different interval names next. This chart shows all the intervals and the names of those intervals. So you can think of this as like one of the strings on the guitar, and I put an example here. So it starts off with E, okay, and that can be considered your root. This is an example row right here. So if you take a look at this E row, those are the notes on the E string. So each note on the string has a named interval. Okay, so if you pick a note, for example, you pick this G, the G in relation to the E would be considered a minor third. So you can pick any note on the string and you're going to have a named interval for those notes. Now, how this is helpful is that these intervals are the ingredients that make up your chords. When you strike a chord, a major E chord for example, there's only three notes included in a major chord. You have your first, so you're going to have your E here, obviously, that's going to be your root note, that's what we call the root note, the first. You're going to include your G sharp, so you're going to have a major third in the chord. And then you're going to have a B in the chord, the fifth. So every major chord that you hear includes the first, the major third, and the fifth. And that's why it's important to know this interval chart, because you can make any chord that you want with this knowledge. And once you know the ingredients of all the different chords, you can put together your own chords in any key. It doesn't necessarily have to be the key of E. You can select a different chord, and I'll go over an example of that. Let's pick a chord to deconstruct and figure out what the intervals are of the chord. So I'm going to pick a C chord for starters. So what are the notes that make up the C chord? So you have a C, an E here on the fourth, you have a G, because that string is open, that's a G, then I have another C, and another E. So it sounds like all the notes that I need are C, E, and G. So let's put them on the chart and figure out what intervals they are. Okay, so the first example chord was a C. And we're going to figure out what intervals make up that C major chord. So I start off and my root note was a C. Okay, and then we just move on from there. So until we get to the notes that we were looking for. So we have a C, an E, and a G that we want. So the next note is a C sharp, D flat, we're not interested in that one. Then after that comes a D, okay, and then a D sharp, E flat, okay, and then next is E. That's one of the ones we were looking for. So there's our E, and it's a major third, okay. So the next note is F, then we get to F sharp, G flat, and then G. That's another one we were looking for. So that G is a fifth, okay? So our C chord that we just made, our major C chord, is made of the root note, called the unison on this chart, the major third, and the perfect fifth. So we have a 1, a 3, and a 5 is how you can name these in numbers. It makes up our major C chord. Let's do another chord. So let's select another chord to deconstruct and figure out the intervals. So I'm going to select an A minor to figure out the interval. So what notes make up that A minor chord? So I have an A, an E, another A, a C, and another E. So it looks like I need an A, an E, and a C. That's what I'll look for. Let's put them on the chart. Okay, let's look for those notes of the A minor. So I start off with my A. Okay, and then what's next? Next is A sharp, B flat, then a B, then a C. That's one of the ones we were looking for. So C is in the chord. That's a minor third. Okay, so then we move on. We have C sharp, D flat, then we have D, then we have D sharp, E flat, then we have E, and that's one of the ones we were looking for. So this A minor chord is made of an A, a C, and an E. So it's your root note, a minor third, and a fifth. Now if you notice, the C was a major, so the only difference between a major chord and a minor chord is the fact that instead of using a major third, we're using a minor third. The fifth stays the same. Both of those chords had a fifth, both had a root. The only difference was the major third versus a minor third. Let's do a more complicated chord like a seventh. Okay, the next chord will be a D7. Okay, so let's look at the notes that are in the D7 chord. You have a D, an A, a C, and an F sharp. So 4 notes this time. Okay, to break down the D7, you start off with the root, the D. Okay, then we have a D sharp, E flat, then you have an E, then you have an F, then you have F sharp, G flat. So this is one of the ones we were looking for. You have a major third in that D7 chord. Okay, then we're going to go on to a G. Then you have G sharp, A flat, then you have an A, and that was one of our notes. Then you have an A sharp, B flat, then you have a B, then you have a C, and that was one of our notes. In fact, that was all 4. So there's the D, the F sharp, the A, and the C. So you can take a look at what makes up a 7th chord now. So you have a root note, a major third, a fifth, and a minor 7th. Makes up any 7th chord. So if you change the key to a different note, you can use these ingredients to make a 7th chord in whatever key you choose. And you can figure out the notes. Here are the intervals that are included in some of the most common chords. The chord names are listed on the left, and to the right of the dash are the intervals that make up those chords. Let's look at some of the most popular interval shapes on the guitar, other than the octave. The octave is probably the most popular, and that's a shape you can make in this manner, and there's different ways to make an octave. And in fact, there's different ways to make all these shapes, but I'll show you the most popular ones. There's a fifth right there. So that's otherwise known as a power chord shape, or the top of a power chord at least, because you might throw on the octave there. But anyway, what you do is you just go down a string and then up 2 frets. So from the A, that E on the 5th string right there is a 5th. So no matter where you place this shape, you play a 5th of the top string note. And you can put it down a string, down another string, until you get to the 2nd and 3rd strings. Then you have to move that bottom string out 1. And that's the 5th between the 2nd and 3rd strings. Then it goes back. to that shape. So that's the fifth. Then you have a major third, which looks like that. So all I've done there is from the A, counted up to that C sharp right there. So that's the fourth fret of the second string. That little shape right there is a major third. So I can use that shape anywhere to make a major third shape until I get down once again to the second and third strings. When I get down to the second and third strings, all you do is you bar strings 2 and 3 right across the same fret, and that's your major third shape. And then when you get to 2 and 1 again, it goes back to that shape. Another popular one is the minor third. Looks like that. So from A it'll be like that. What I've done there is I've gone down a string and then back 2 frets. That's your minor third shape. The minor third between the strings 2 and 3 is shaped like that. So instead of 2 frets apart, they're just 1 fret apart. And then it goes back to normal when you get to strings 1 and 2. So this use of intervals can be applied to things such as scales. For example, if I play the A major scale, I selected certain intervals out of the chromatic scale. So for example, here's the chromatic scale from A to A. So it's every note between the octave A there that I've selected. So when I played the major scale, I didn't hit all those notes. I left off some. So the major scale is composed of certain intervals in that chromatic run. Same if I play a natural minor scale. I'm playing different notes than I just played on the major scale. And there's all different scales you can play based on the intervals you choose between the two A's. So another example is like a pentatonic scale. There's a major pentatonic. I selected different intervals between the two A's. I've left out more intervals. Same with a minor pentatonic. I've eliminated some notes, so certain intervals are not included. This same chart can be applied to scales that we use. Now this row here with the green check marks and red X's are the notes that are included in the major scale. So you can see here we have a root note in the major scale, then we have a major second, and we skip the minor second. Okay, so what you'll notice here is it's a full step between the first and second notes. We include the major third, not the minor third. Then we have a fourth, the fifth, and we skip what's the note in between. Okay, and then we move on, we have a major sixth, a major seventh, and an octave. So if you notice here, we're using all the majors of the third, the second, we call them majors, and the sixth and the seventh are called majors. The fifth and the fourth are never referred to as major or minor. They're referred to as augmented or diminished or perfect. So this pattern right here is the major scale. So it goes whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. And that's how you come up with the major scale. Now I'll write in the natural minor scale next. You can see how the construction changes for the natural minor scale here in the second row. So of course we have a root again, that repeats. You use a major second again, but then you're using a minor third here. That's one of the differences. Then you're using a fourth again, that's the same. The fifth is the same. Then you're going to use a minor sixth. That's different. So major scale, you use a major sixth. Natural minor scale, you use a minor sixth. You also use a minor seventh. So you can see the difference here in the two different scales. So the important thing to realize here is that every different scale that you play has a different construction, a different pattern of check marks that are going to go into that scale. And that's how you can use intervals to figure out the notes in your scale. Something else to note about intervals is once you get out of the first octave, you keep the number system going. So that's where you come up with ninths, for example. So you can look at this ninth chord, for example, and break it down. It's a root note, a third, a seventh, and then a ninth. Now that E there is called the ninth. Normally the E in relation to the D would be the second. But since the E is more than an octave higher than the D root note, that's why we call it a ninth. You keep that number system going up. The same naming applies when you get to a number like an 11th or a 13th. The 11th is really the same as a 4th, except an octave higher, and the 13th is really the same as a 6th, an octave higher.